A small town in the Wild West is located on the outskirts of the desert near the mountains and cliffs. At the entrance to the city, it is very empty. There are no people on the street at all, and it may seem at first glance that this city is dead. From the tavern located in the city center, you can hear the voices of people inside the building. The life of the visitors is in full swing. The waiter is shouting to bring them food as quickly as possible. People are placing orders. There are a huge number of people inside the tavern. The entire city is now here, and they are on their lunch break. One of the men asked his comrade if he had heard about the Mansock merchant detachment that was defeated. He saw that his interlocutor knew nothing about this and said that this detachment had as many as 5 guards. Even they could not do anything. Only one porter returned back. He accused the Fighting Alliance of not being able to protect the merchants. The man finished the alcohol in his glass and then put the glass on the table and made a very loud sound. The second man answered his interlocutor that people who deserve to die can simply walk around the world and not be afraid of being punished. He turned his head to the side and looked at the next table at which 4 men were sitting. And after that he said that there are now a lot of thieves in the villages and outside the villages. The first man asked his interlocutor to watch his tongue, because these thieves can hear him, and if they don't like something, then they can attack him. But the second man was not afraid that he would be heard, and said that he would not close his mouth just because of fear. An unfamiliar man appeared in the city, approached the doors of the tavern. The first man at that moment told his friend that if he is not afraid to say such things out loud to the bandits, why won't he say it to them personally? The stranger walked up to the door and opened it, and in order to enter, a long sword hung behind his back, and on his head he had a large straw hat. The guy entered the building. He was faithful and immediately attracted the attention of the visitors of this establishment. Everyone turned their attention to this stranger. 2 men turned their heads to this guy and began to look at him carefully. At the next table, 2 comrades were drinking alcohol, and they had to stop this process for a few seconds in order to look at the guy who had just entered the tavern. All the people who were in the establishment looked at the stranger who was standing near the door and began to examine him. Even the owner of the establishment was dissatisfied with the video of a stranger here. The guy in a calm voice asked the owner of the establishment where he could sit down. The owner would try to be friendly and tell this guy that he can sit where it is convenient for him and the waiter will come up to him now. The stranger began to walk around the establishment, looking for a table at which he would like to sit. The people in the establishment continued to look at him with an incredulous gaze. The stranger chose a table for himself in the farthest part of this tavern. This table was near the window when the guy sat on the chair. He took off his straw hat and put it on the table. The owner of the establishment approached the guy and brought him a decanter of alcohol after he put this decanter on the table. He told the stranger not to pay attention to the looks of the visitors. The stranger was surprised. I looked at the owner, and the owner told him that the people here are not used to strangers because rarely anyone walks in this area. Not to mention the fact that lately it has been restless here. He said that for some reason they were experiencing a flow of unfamiliar visitors. And after that, he asked the guy if he wanted something to eat. The stranger replied that he wanted to order what they could cook here the fastest. The owner smiled when he heard such an order and said that this stranger was most likely dying of hunger. He promised him that he would quickly prepare a bowl of noodles, so he would only have to wait a few minutes. The stranger looked at the owner and asked who else came to this establishment besides him. At that moment, a man jumped up in the center of the tavern and began shouting very loudly that he was dissatisfied with the game of dominoes. This man began to accuse the people who were sitting at the table with him of cheating during the game. The owner of the establishment pointed his finger at the people who were playing at the far table and made it clear to the stranger that these were the very people who came to his establishment, and they were strangers. He looked carefully at these guys and drank alcohol from his glass. He was thinking about something. A man who made a scandal about being deceived during a game hit the table with his fist, and the dominoes scattered in different directions. He said that there was a clear video of how his opponent cheated during the game, but his opponent behaved very calmly and said that he did not agree with the accusations and he played honestly. He answered the man who was standing in front of him and said that you should not accuse a person of cheating if you yourself do not know how to play. A man asked this guy a question and asked why he was winning all day. And the man himself only does what he loses, and his opponent answered because it's all because he just plays badly, and the other players won at least something, but only he lost all games. The stranger carefully watched this conflict, and at some point even smiled when he realized that the situation was getting out of control. He stood up at the table and started walking towards these guys. As he walked, he said that he had finally found this idiot. The conflict between these two men escalated into another scam, but the guy in purple clothes said that his opponent had no evidence. He started insulting the angry man for going and accusing someone of anime evidence. These words greatly angered the already aggressive man, and he could not restrain himself and pushed his opponent's shoulder with his hand. They were so angry that they were going to go outside to resolve this conflict and fight. A man in purple clothes is ready to fight with a disgruntled player and punch him in the face, but sudden people stop him. He turned his head back to see who decided to stop him and saw a stranger standing behind him. The stranger knew that this purple-robed man's name was Yang Guan and said that he had finally managed to find this charlatan. Yang Guan saw the stranger's face and shouted his name, Zhang Qian, in a frightened voice. A disgruntled player intervened in their dialogue and said that they could talk later, but for now they needed to sort things out among themselves. Zhang Qian looked at this man with a contemptuous look and said that he has nothing to do with him. Therefore, it is better for him to just shut up. Yang Guan began to feel scared and awkward when he saw this guy in front of him and asked him what he was doing here. Zhang Qian said that 2 whole months had already passed since their last meeting, and he was always looking for Yang Guan. Zhang Qian saw that Yang Guan and his gang were doing very well, which made the guy angry, and he realized that he was not doing as well as these guys. Yang Guan asked in a frightened voice, was he able to find his friends and kill them? Zhang Qian said that he found all his friends and they are no more. Now only Yang Guan remains, and he is the last. Yang Guan began to step back and try to calm the guy down. He tried to justify himself and say that he never intended to deceive the martial artist in dominoes. Zhang Qian was dissatisfied with this guy's excuses and said that he didn't mean to do it, but did it anyway. I deceived the martial artist. Yang Guan didn't know what to answer to this man and just started smiling and stepping back. The only thought that came to his mind was to try to run away from here as far as possible in order to stay alive. Zhang Qian was surprised by the impudence and stupidity of this man. He couldn't even believe that this guy was so stupid if he thought he would run away from a martial artist. He grabbed his hand by the hair and thereby did not allow him to run far. Yang Guan began to scream very loudly in pain and try to get out of this grip. Zhang Qian was very angry with this man's action and therefore hit his head on the table with all his strength, and the food that was on the table scattered in different directions. The man who was sitting at the next table was extremely surprised, and when I saw that a fight was starting to happen here, 2 men continued to drink alcohol, but they had to stop when they saw that the stranger was beating up the charlatan, who was pretty tired of everyone in this establishment. Yang Guan tried to justify himself and shouted that he did not want to deceive the martial artist, and he did not do it. But it all sounded very unconvincing. Yang Guan said that Zhang Qian was the only player who stayed until the very end and lost. All his money was shaken out of him to the last coin. Zhang Qian did not want to listen to this little thief's stupid excuses and decided to bring him to the frequency to prove that he was actually cheating. He put his hand into his hand in Yang Guan's shirts to find a hidden domino dice. He managed to find this game bone and thereby prove that this person cheats during his games and deceives the players. The man who was cheated during the game a few minutes ago finally saw the evidence that this man was a charlatan and realized that he was right. Zhang Qian said that he only had one question for this worthless thief, and he asked where his money is now. Yang Guan said in a low, frightened voice that he used this money to pay off the martial alliance. Zhang Qian took this bastard by the head with his hand and hit him with his face on the table. after which he said that his money should not be spent to pay for his search. Yang Guan said that he simply had no other choice. After all, if he had not paid for his search, he would not have even been able to enter the tavern to eat. Zhang Qian grabbed his hair and lifted his head up after that. He tried to take a deep breath and exhale in order to calm down and understand how this problem can be solved. He grabbed his shirt collar and wanted to punch him in the face with all his might. But before that, he asked if he had any money. Yang Guan replied that he had some money that he was able to earn in this tavern lately, and if the martial artist wants money, he can take these coins. Zhang Qian looked at the gaming table and saw that there was a small handful of gold coins and a bag of money on it. He looked at the approximate amount of money that was lying on the table and realized that this amount was much less than he expected, but at least it was some money. Zhang Qian threw this idiot aside and went to the table to collect his money. The people who were in the tavern stood up from their tables and began to gather around Yang Guan. The man yelled at the stranger and asked him to stop and not take this money. He said that this money that this charlatan won by deception is this man's money, and he would like to return it back. Zhang Qian said that this is not his problem, and if he needs his money back, then let him personally ask for it from Yang Guan. He needed a few seconds to think about these words and decide what to do next. This man was pretty stupid, but when he finally realized that this stranger would now take his money, he again felt incredible rage and said that he was not happy with these options. He wanted to take his money back. He extended his hand forward in order to push the stranger aside and not allow him to take the money. Zhang Qian grabbed the man's hand and held on tightly. After that, he pulled this man by the arm and threw him aside. The man did not expect that the situation would lead to a fight and fell to the floor and hit his face on a wooden covering. The rest of the men who were in this establishment were shocked that the stranger came to their territory, took their money, and also fought with the rest of the visitors. The man came out of the crowd and said that he would not tolerate such an attitude from a stranger, after which he shook his hand into a fist and wanted to strike the stranger. Zhang Qian dodged this blow without much effort and realized that a fight could no longer be avoided. After he dodged the blow, he decided that he needed to immediately launch a contour attack and punched the man in the chest with his fist. After this, he immediately decided to strike a man standing nearby who was watching the fight from the side. He grabbed the two men by the collars of their shirts and began to pull them towards each other. He made the two men crash their foreheads into each other and received very heavy damage. After the collision, they began to feel dizzy and could not find their way around in space. They were able to stand on their feet for a few seconds, but then lost consciousness and fell to the floor. The rest of the people who were in the establishment saw that real chaos was beginning here and decided that it was better for them not to interfere in this conflict. Yang Guan saw that Zhang Qian alone was able to knock out 3 strong men at once and realized that now he would most likely want to hit him and began to shake with fear. Zhang Qian heard this deceiver shaking and almost crying and decided to come closer to him. Yang Guan tried to crawl back and asked for forgiveness, and he begged not to be killed and left alive. Zhang Qian grabbed this weakling by the collar of his shirt and said that the money he took from the table was not enough for him to leave him alone. Suddenly, one of the men was able to recover after taking heavy damage and turning to the stranger again. He accused the stranger of breaking his nose and said that he would have to answer for it at the cost of his life. Zhang Qian apologized for having to hit this man, but he said that he lost a lot more money to this man with some small change that was lying on the table. The man began to behave very strangely. He did not continue the dialogue, but simply turned around and began to run towards the exit. Zhang Qian asked what was wrong with this idiot and why did he run away. But Yang Guan replied that this man's name was Jin Youngsuk. Zhang Qian said that he was not interested in the name of this idiot and continued to extort money from this charlatan. Zhang Qian said that he has little time left to return the money to him. After all, if he doesn't do this, he will have to break his dantian. It will be very painful. Yang Guan said that there is no need for this, that a very weak person, if his dantian is broken, he will be completely useless. But Zhang Qian was not going to joke or forgive this thief and wanted his money back. Otherwise, He would not mind killing or maiming this Yang Guan. He didn't understand what they were doing to him, how to correct this situation, but he felt that he needed to think as quickly as possible because his opponent's patience would now run out. Yang Guan said that he knows how to fix this situation, but first he needs to be released. Because he has one artifact in his pocket, Zhang Qian took him at his word and let him go. After that, Yang Guan sat down on the floor and reached into the inner pocket of his vest with his hand. He put his hand forward, and in the center of his palm lay a jade ring. Zhang Qian carefully examined this ring, and Yang Guan said that he bought this ring in the city and said that it is real jade. If he can find a good buyer, he will receive a good amount for this ring. He asked Zhang Qian's brother, "Will this ring be enough to finally pay him off?" He took this ring and squeezed it into his fist so that no one would see it. Zhang Qian smiled when he felt that he had a real jade ring and said that this artifact would be enough to end the conflict. He put the ring in the inside pocket of his jacket and remembered that all this time they were watched by a crowd of people who were in the tavern. He looked at them with a dissatisfied look and tried to understand what he should do now. People were frightened by this behavior of a stranger and did not know what else to expect from him. Zhang Qian asked the owner of the establishment why his bowl of noodles is still not on his table because he ordered it quite a long time ago. The establishment became quiet and calm. The owner went to the kitchen and prepared noodles for the new guest, after which he brought it to him and put it on the table. Yang Guan carefully watched Zhang Qian eat his noodles and felt that a feeling of hunger was awakening in him. He told the guy that now is not the right time to eat noodles carefree. He tried to warn him that he had better quickly eat his food and get out of here. He said that Zhang Qian was acting too calmly and did not understand that he was in great danger because the person whose nose he broke was a very influential person. Zhang Qian put an empty plate of food on the table and thereby showed that he had finally finished the noodles. After that, he took a glass of alcohol and drank it in one gulp, thereby demonstrating that he was not afraid of anyone, and Yang Guan's warning did not scare him. Zhang Qian said that he finally finished his food and is now ready to listen to everything Yang Guan tells him. The man said that Jin Yang Suk can and looks like he walks, but no one touches him here because his older brother is a martial artist. Zhang Qian said that he is not afraid to fight a martial artist because he is a master himself. Yang Guan replied that he knows this, and all people have at least once heard about the master of fist-fighting Zhang Qian from Amju, but everyone insists that his sword is just an accessory until he pulls it out. Zhang Qian did not understand what the problem was and asked his interlocutor to get closer to the point and say directly what the problem was, and Yang Guan said that your idiot brother whose nose he broke is the problem, but the main problem is that the elder brother Jin Chang Suk is from the cadaver clan of the Chaos sect. Zhang Qian reminded his interlocutor that he told him that there is a fighting alliance here, and even despite this, the Chaos sect is still hanging around in the area. Yang Guan finally saw that his interlocutor was interested in this topic and said that he could tell him the information for a few silver coins. Zhang Qian smiled when he heard that the weak one was coming, still had the courage to ask him for money. He threatened him with his fist, and the charlatan immediately calmed down. He said that he shouldn't use his fists, and he would tell everything just like that. Yang Guan cleared his throat to begin telling this story and said that his interlocutor's character was unique. Yang Guan spoke about his assumptions that the boss of this sect and the leader of the combat alliance are somehow connected with each other. Therefore, the combat alliance is not being restlessly carried out yet. Don't touch them, and Chang Suk is the most important among them. Zhang Qian asked Yang Guan how he had the brains to run into this man's younger brother, and the man replied that usually these people behave calmly, and what happened today happens all the time. Zhang Qian replied that before, the martial alliance introduced itself much better, closely followed the order. Yang Guan smiled and replied that now it is more cordial to live, or they think the same. Apparently due to the fact that they are often complained about. They open their mouths so easily on strangers' suspended lands. Zhang Qian suggested to his interlocutor to pack his things and get out of here as quickly as possible. But Yang Gwen replied that there is one problem why he cannot do this. He looked carefully at his interlocutor and decided to find out what kind of problem he had. Yang Gwen drew attention to the people sitting at the next table and said that apparently they have a bad reputation in this city. The men sparring at the next table looked with distrust at the strangers who calmly communicated in this establishment. The local residents treated strangers with distrust and hatred, especially those who staged a pogrom and a fight here today. Yang Gwen said that it is best to avoid people from the alliance because they cannot cause much trouble, and Zhang Qian replied that he only avoids them because he is a weakling. But in fact, there is no point in being afraid of them. The owner of the establishment approached them and addressed specifically Zhang Qian. He put in several gold coins that the stranger had given him before. He said that he would not tolerate unrest in his establishment, and therefore decided to return him the money for the noodle soup and the room that this man rented. The owner very politely asked strangers to leave this establishment and not come here again. Yang Gwen began to laugh and said that if everything has already reached the point that the owner himself is personally kicking you out and I want to, then it's better to leave, because if people from the clan come, they will have big problems and it will be difficult to get out of here alive. Zhang Qian did not intend to immediately leave the establishments and decided to continue finishing his noodles. The owner and Yang Gwen were shocked by this guy's behavior. They didn't understand why he was behaving so brazenly. They watched as he loudly began to slurp and chew his food. Zhang Qian decided to finish his portion of noodle soup. He put the empty plate of noodles on the table and calmly continued to sit in his place. His stomach started to growl very loudly after he finished eating these noodles, and he burped loudly. Zhang Qian began to pick his teeth with his finger in order to pick out pieces of meat from there, and said that everything would be fine, and he was not afraid of the alliance and the sect. Yang Gwen said that the cadaver clan has about 20 people, and asked what he was going to do if they didn't come here now. Zhang Qian decided to pour alcohol from the decanter into his cup and drink some more. He was not afraid that someone might come here. Yang Gwen said he would leave on his own. Zhang Qian said that he should have left here earlier instead of talking to him. But now it's too late because these people came here. The man took a step forward and opened the doors to this establishment. He was a tall man with black hair and a very strong build. He was wearing a long red vest. His face was very angry, and he wanted to deal with the man who broke his brother's nose. He began to warm up his fists before a fight and asked his younger brother which of these people offended him and broke his nose. Jin Young-suk pointed his hand to the far table and said that these were the same guys who deceived him, robbed him, and broke his nose. The older brother asked his younger brother how it happened that he was robbed, and Young-suk replied that it doesn't matter, and the most important thing is that these people are scammers. The older brother called him a non-entity and said that he could not deal with his problems on his own. And after that, he began to meet these guys halfway. He stood opposite them and said that they don't look like locals, and asked if they should have broken up and started a fight in a foreign village. The owner approached the thug in a quiet, careful voice and said that they were earning little now and would not be able to buy new tables, so he asked them not to break the furniture. The big man looked at the owner of the establishment with a reproachful look and made him understand that he had better leave here. The owner of the establishment opened his eyes so wide for the first time in a long time because he was scared and realized that he really had better leave here. He began to walk towards the kitchen and grumbled under his breath that his establishment would soon go bankrupt because of these fights. Yang Gwen started to panic and try to run away from here, but Zhang Qian told him to sit still if he didn't want to die right now. Yang Gwen didn't understand why this guy acted so confidently and calmly. Several more people entered the building. These were also members of this clan. They came here to punish these strangers. Some of them were armed with clubs. A serious fight was brewing in the tavern. The clan members were angry because the strangers were behaving very arrogantly. Yang Gwen couldn't even imagine how they would resolve this conflict, because there were a lot of enemies, and there were only 2 of them. The big guy approached these guys and said that he was very pleased to meet them, and his name was Jin Chung-suk. He said that he was solving problems in this village. He informed the strangers that this place is very calm, so he is idle all the time since there is little work here. But today he finally has a job, and he will gladly fulfill his duty. Zhang Qian sat calmly at the table and drank alcohol. He didn't even pay attention to this thug. Jin was very surprised by the calmness of this man. He didn't understand where he got so much courage from. Yang Guan held and jumped up from his seat. After that, he began to correct the situation verbally and said that there was a misunderstanding between them. Ian said that a few days ago he came to this city and heard many stories about the greatness of this thug, so he really wanted to meet him. He tried to gain confidence in this thug so that he would not be knocked down and said that their meeting was a real destiny. He introduced the man who was sitting opposite him at the table and said that his name was Zhang Qian, and this guy also came to the city not long ago. Jean pointed his finger at this cowardly weakling and said that he was a fraud. Yang Guan understood that this conflict could not be corrected with words and tried to justify himself and say that he was not a fraudster, but he did not succeed. Jin pointed his hand at the sitting guy and said that this guy is a bully, and both need to be punished for this. He accused them of suddenly showing up in this quiet city and deceiving the residents. And in response to the dissatisfaction of his younger brother, who could not stand such a spectacle, they responded with their fists and will be punished for this. Yang Guan was insanely frightened by this decision of this issue and understood that today he would not leave here unpunished. Zhang Qian calmly continued to sit at the table and did not betray his emotions. He would be cold and insensitive at this moment. Jin said that he was forced to take them to the fighting alliance and detain them as criminals, and advised them not to resist, otherwise it would only get worse. When Zhang Qian heard this man's threats against him, all he did was laugh. He said that this whole situation looks very funny, and this is the first time he has heard such threats addressed to him, and is not used to the fact that they don't want to kill him right away. Jin told him that he was a righteous man from the world of martyrs, and he would never kill a man in a hotel in broad daylight. But for what he did to his brother's nose, he won't allow this stranger to leave the village with his limbs intact. He leaned towards his face and said that for this act he would break his arms and legs, and if this guy resisted, she would tear off what was between his legs. Yang Guan was so scared that he could wet his pants from fear at any moment. The people who came to detain them started laughing with him. Their behavior is this weakling, and they understood that they could make fun of him thoroughly. Zhang Qian finally came out with this goon's idiotic speech and said that if a person acts so calmly in such a situation, shouldn't people be wary and think that this guy might have something? Zhang Qian said that he may be not just a strange person, but a real soldier of the Imperial Army. He asked Jin if this big guy was afraid to get involved with a soldier of the Imperial Army, and Jin was pretty scared at that moment. He stepped back, and she was scared, and kept asking him in a trembling voice whether he was actually a soldier of the Imperial Army. Jin bowed low to this man and said that he was wrong and did not recognize the man who is a soldier of the Imperial Army. He immediately apologized to him for the inconvenience. Zhang Qian started laughing. At this moment, because this big guy felt very weak and acted like he was walking, then he said that he was not a soldier of the Imperial Army. Jean, at that moment, I felt helpless and deceived. Rage began to awaken in him, and he began to lose control of himself. Jin said that such a joke would definitely not break his neck. But there was no point in talking because Zhang Qian was tired of joking and mocking these guys and finally decided to start a fight. He threw a powerful kick with his foot right at Jaw's Jin. After that, Zhang Qian tried to jump over the table in order to start a fight with the steel members of this sect, and their boss at that moment flew back. He carefully watched as the big man tried to stay on his feet, but he couldn't do anything. Jin walked back and fell onto one of the tables on which there was food. Plates began to fly in different directions. The table and chairs were broken. The boss himself fell to the ground and blood flowed out of his mouth. His assistants approached him to see what happened to him, but Jin was unconscious. His blood continued to flow from his mouth and stained the wooden polos. His teeth were broken and lay near his head. Jaws. The clan members were shocked by this stranger's behavior. They did not expect him to be so strong. The younger brother understood that the older brother who was supposed to protect him had now received very severe damage and was left without teeth. Yang Guan carefully watched this fight from the side. He was shocked that this guy was not really that strong. He couldn't even believe that he had just been able to knock out Jin himself with one blow. Zhang Qian said that he was tired of meeting weak opponents and was waiting for someone to fight back besides the Imperial Army. The man was furious that this guy had just allowed himself to attack their boss and ordered the others to attack him and kill him. They began to carry out the order and ran towards this stranger in order to attack him. One of these guys swung his baton and wanted to hit Zhang Qian, but the martial artist just laughed when he saw this blow and said that his movements were absolutely clumsy, and if he fought like that, he would come out of here dead. He clenched his fist tightly and was preparing to strike his opponent, and before that he said that they were just a bunch of ordinary bandits. After this guy took damage to his jaw, he felt his teeth start to break. He couldn't even imagine that his opponent would be so strong and dexterous. Another enemy armed with a club began to run towards him and wanted to strike him from behind. Zhang Qian did not notice his opponent in time and swung his leg to strike him back. He kicked him right in the head. His heel hit the enemy directly in the forehead and changed its shape in the skull. Zhang Qian looked around him to understand how many more enemies were here. He needed to assess the situation. He immediately delivered another blow to the guy who was to his right. Zhang Qian dealt quick blows to his opponents, and they did not even have time to fight off these attacks. He punched one of his enemies in the jaw from the side. Then he jumped to the side and dodged this attack that the enemy wanted to inflict on him. Zhang Qian delivered an elbow strike directly to his opponent's chest and broke his ribs. This bandit felt very severe pain and found it difficult to breathe. Zhang Qian had just gotten the hang of it and was ready to fight further. He enjoyed beating up these guys because they were like training dummies for him. He delivered the next blow to his enemy right in the face. After the bandit was hit in the face, his jaw immediately became broken. Behind him stood two more bandits armed with clubs, but they were already afraid to go into battle because they understood that it was pointless. Zhang Qian looked at these two guys and stopped, but he saw that they were very scared and he decided to take advantage of this. He tried to bring their fear to its climax and looked them straight in the eyes. They saw him as a monster who could not be stopped. He was just another chaos for them. But suddenly a man came into the building and ordered everyone here to stop. Zhang Qian looked carefully at this man and tried to understand who he was and why. He allowed himself to stop this fight. Yang Guan saw the badge on this man's jacket and realized that this was most likely the sheriff of this village. He was an adult man of about 50. He had long brown hair and a large mustache. He was dressed in black clothes and had a sheriff's badge on his jacket. This icon means that the person standing in front of them is a member of the fighting alliance. Yang Guan did not understand what would happen now because a member of the alliance would arrest them all, and then they would have even more problems. Zhang Qian looked attentively at this man and waited to see how further events would develop. The bandits who stood there the day before were frightened by the sheriff's visit. Near the sheriff stood two soldiers armed with swords, and the sheriff himself asked the stranger if he knew who they were. Zhang Qian was not worried or afraid of this man. He said that apparently this man is the head of the Martial Alliance Department. This could be understood from his badge that hung on his jacket. The sheriff smiled and closed his eyes. He was amused by the calm behavior of the stranger. He began to walk slowly towards this guy and said that after all, if he really is the head of the Combat Alliance Department, he reported that he had just received a complaint from local residents that this stranger had attacked local townspeople. Jin Young-suk pointed his finger at this stranger and said that he didn't just attack, he crippled him. And his brother Zhang Qian and Yang Guan were unhappy that this upstart was constantly complaining to everyone about their behavior and telling everyone about what they had done here. Jin Young-suk said that this guy knocked out his older brother, and now all his teeth are knocked out, and he won't be able to eat food properly. The sheriff asked this guy if it was true that he knocked out this thug. Zhang Qian replied that this was a necessary measure, and he needed to defend himself, and he would not have done this if he had not been attacked first. The sheriff was dissatisfied with this answer and he asked again what self-defense meant in his understanding. Zhang Qian replied that everything was exactly as it was. 9 people attacked him at once, and 8 of them had batons in their hands. The sheriff said this guy looks safe and sound. That's very strange. Zhang Qian replied that it was just a coincidence that the people who attacked him turned out to be just a bunch of weaklings, but that's their problem. The sheriff smiled and lowered his head down. He was amused by the behavior of this stranger. Zhang said that he did not kill anyone and everyone remained alive after the fight, but in self-defense, he injured them. Jin Young-suk could not calm down and asked the chief why he did not apprehend this criminal because his older brothers are now unconscious. He pointed to his nose and said that this man attacked him and broke his nose. The sheriff was now in a difficult position, and he needed to make the right decision about what he would do with this guy. He ordered his 2 soldiers to apprehend this criminal. They answered in unison that they would immediately carry out the boss's order and took a fighting stance in order to detain the criminal. Jin Young-suk began to laugh and rejoice at his victory, and said that it was better not to mess with him because he is an influential person in this village. He said that even a martial artist would have a hard time dealing with a martial alliance. Suddenly he felt that everything was not going according to plan, and the battle alliance approached him from behind. They held Jin Young-suk and made a trap around his neck that prevented him from getting out or escaping. Zhang Qian was surprised by this decision of the sheriff. He didn't understand why they decided to detain this particular upstart. But he was satisfied with this decision. Jin Young-suk tried to find out from the sheriff why he decided to detain him instead of the stranger who started these fights here. The sheriff was very angry at this idiot's behavior, and said that the 9th person along with Jin Chang-suk were now lying on the floor unconscious. He said that it was not profitable for him to tolerate a person because of whom so many people suffered just because he lost his money. Jin Young-suk did not expect that the sheriff would make exactly such a decision, and now he had nowhere to go. He set himself up and would be punished for it. The sheriff said that of all the fighters present here, only Jin Chang-suk and Moon Ju showed that they use martial arts and at least somehow master them. And if this opponent is alone, then the sheriff himself can deal with him. After that, he said that his assistants would deal with everyone else. Jin Young-suk began to threaten the sheriff that when his brother wakes up, he will definitely punish the sheriff for such an act. But the sheriff said that it was a bad idea to intimidate him. Then he snapped his fingers and thereby gave the order to his soldiers to kill this guy. The new alliance soldiers entered this correctly, and Jin was taken away as a prisoner. The sheriff stood in the center of the room, and the rest of the members of the combat alliance began to enter the room. And the sheriff himself said that the elder brother would wake up, and he would already be behind bars. Zhang Qian observed all the situations from the side, and understood that because of him, half the village was now arrested. All gang members were tied up with ropes and began to be taken out of the tavern one by one and taken to prison. The warriors of the combat alliance took those who were lying on the floor unconscious by the arms and legs and began to carry out their bodies. Zhang Qian took his straw hat from the table and wanted to put it on his head. When he put it on, he immediately headed to the exit to leave this place. The sheriff asked this guy to stop. He said that Jin Chang-suk is not a martial artist, but he is very good at fighting, and was very surprised that the stranger could easily deal with him. He asked where this guy learned such martial arts. Zhang Qian heard the sheriff's question, but didn't want to answer it right away. Thought about his question for a bit. He decided not to answer this question, and instead continued to head towards the exit in order to get out of here. Zhang Qian put his hand into the inner pocket of his long jacket and pulled out a bag of money, after which he saw the owner of the establishment and said that this was money for the inconvenience caused. He put the bag of coins on the table and thanked the owner for feeding him delicious noodles. Zhang Qian continued to walk towards the exit of the establishment, and the sheriff watched this guy leave. There was nothing I could do, and there was no way I could stop him. All he could do was watch him go. The sheriff noticed that this stranger is a very taciturn guy, and he clearly does not like to talk. When he left, the doors moved from side to side for some time. It was very hot in the desert, and the wind scattered the sand. I picked it up from the earth, Evening was already approaching, and at such a time it was very dangerous to be in the desert yourself. Zhang Qian saddled his horse and set off on a journey. He needed to find a new place where he could safely spend the night and relax. Young Gwen followed him and asked this guy to wait for him. After all, he wanted to go with him. He said that Zhang Qian alone was able to deal with all the problems in this city, but still continues to pretend that he was driven out of here. He asked why the boss made this particular decision. Zhang Qian replied that this was because one of the employees of the Fighting Alliance came for the criminal, and if he had already made noise, then it was better to leave the city. Young Gwen asked him if he was worried about people gossiping behind his back in this city. Young Gwen spoke about what he knows about the group of the Combat Alliance that patrols the local territories, and they may meet on their way. Young Gwen was surprised that the boss did not have time to do anything, as the patrol group was already ready. However, this groom appeared Zhang Qian and single-handedly defeated all the criminals. He was surprised that the boss adapts to the circumstances so quickly and changes his shoes only because it's more profitable. Zhang Qian did not know what to answer to his interlocutor, and therefore simply continued to silently ride his horse. Yang Gwen could not calm down and constantly called the members of the Combat Alliance idiots or mentally retarded people because smart people would not serve the Combat Alliance. He admitted that it was all very unexpected and asked if he wanted to work with him. A road sign appeared in front of them, pointing in 2 different directions, and they stopped their horses near this road sign. Yang Gwen asked Zhang Qian where he was going because he wanted to go on a further journey with him. But Zhang Qian was not happy with this proposal and said that he wanted to get away from him and never see that vile face again. Young Gwen began to laugh and feel awkward. He tried to find out why he dislikes him so much. Zhang Qian replied that he hopes to never meet this swindler again. If this happens, then after all, he has enough brains to follow him. Then he will break his leg. Yang Gwen. I tried to stop this guy and asked him to just listen to him. He wanted to somehow persuade him to take him with me. But Zhang Qian didn't even want to listen to the words of this charlatan and simply continued to ride forward alone. Yang Gwen sat astride his horse and watched as his only friend is now driving away into the distance and he can't do anything about it. He was left alone and all he cared about was that this guy was behaving very arrogantly and where he even came from. After all, this person does not look like people from the Amju Valley. He thought that it would be very good if he could find out some information about this person, because it could be very useful for him, and he could then sell this information. Yang Gwen understood that he needed to move to the next city because the sun was already setting, and it would be very dangerous to travel at night, and he would not be able to return back to this city. Night fell, and the moon hung in the center of the sky. It illuminated the desert and was the only source of light for lost travelers. He lit a fire and decided to stop and take a break to wait for the morning. He poured water from a jug into his glass. After this, Zhang Qian decided to drink water to remove his thirst, but he absolutely didn't like the taste of this water. He spat it out and couldn't even swallow it. It tasted disgusting and was impossible to drink, so the best choice for him was to cure the terrible water, and next time he saw that his horse was standing next to him and wanted something from him, she looked at him carefully. Suddenly, the horse began to make strange noises and wave its head in different directions. She was very tired and fell to the ground to sleep. The horse did this very suddenly, and the owner did not understand her behavior. He was angry that the horse was acting so strangely and said that someday he would sell it at the market or exchange it for a pair of new boots. After that, he placed the empty cup on the ground near him. He sat and watched the fire burn and tried to remember today and replay all the events that happened to him in his head. He remembered the sheriff who asked him where he learned these martial arts. He was very bored and decided to conduct a dialogue in his head and talk with this sheriff. He said that he learned this story about martial arts. After that, he let his head down and began to remember his past life, and he felt very sad about it. He remembered the time when he was still an ordinary guy in the real world, and even not to believe that he would actually fight using martial arts. He stood at the pedestrian crossing and waited for the light to turn green so that he could cross the road. At that moment, he was reading stories about martial arts on his phone and had a guitar hanging behind him. The traffic light was still red, which meant crossing the road was prohibited. But after a couple of seconds, the traffic light turned green and pedestrians could finally cross the road. Zhang Qian hid his phone in his jacket pocket and began to cross the road. From around the corner, you saw their car. It was a big bus that was rushing towards him and was not going to stop. He turned his head and saw this bus. The headlights blinded his eyes. A little girl walked ahead of him and also saw that a bus was coming towards her. She was confused and did not understand what to do. Zhang Qian felt that this was the moment when he had to save the life of this little girl, and he threw away his guitar and immediately jumped towards her to save her. The car was already very close, and only one could survive. Zhang Qian was able to save a little girl, and she survived for his life. He donated and was hit by a car. Now he would be a corpse that bleeds on a crosswalk. People who found near the accident site looked with horror at the situation that happened here. The car hit an innocent guy, and people immediately began to run to him in order to somehow help. On this day, it was a very beautiful night, and there were a huge number of stars in the sky. It was impossible to count them, but they were beautiful to look at. Zhang Qian sent it all to hell and said that he no longer wants to remember it because it brings bad emotions to him. He took his hat, which was lying not far from him. He put this hat on his head and realized that it would be best for him to get some sleep now. Zhang Qian sat near the fire and tried to sleep in order to gain as much strength as possible before setting off. He still could not believe that in such a strange way he got into this world. Zhang Qian went on the road in the morning and said that if he touched Domino at least once in his life, he would cease to consider himself a man, and was shocked that he had to go to the nearest city for so long. The horse was already very tired, and it was hard for her to go further in the desert. It was very hot, and she was thirsty. They were driving through the desert and did not understand how long they would have to be on the road. Zhang Qian saw something very strange and decided to stop here to take a closer look at what was happening there. The horse stopped listening to him, and he had to scold it so that it would stop and not move. He smelled the smell of blood that was carried on the wind, and the smell was very strong, as if a lot of people had died nearby. Near the broken caravan there were many corpses. Most of these people were killed with swords that were sticking out of their bodies. Everything in the area was stained with blood. There were dead merchants lying on the ground. They were also killed. Most likely they were attacked by bandits. Scattered around were the goods that the merchants were transporting. They were broken or scattered on the earth. Many people died for these goods. You can hear the voice of a man. He asks for help. Have mercy. Save me. He said that he would give everything up only if they spared him. He asked not to kill him, because if they kill him, he will not be able to give them anything. Opposite the person who asked for help stood a scary man. He was missing one eye and had a terrible scar on his right eye. He had very large teeth, strong build. He held his hands with a sword and told the merchant that he should have thought earlier. He asked the master for mercy and said that he had a family and children. The merchant was ready to give him everything he had left to stay alive. But this did not stop the bloodthirsty bandit. The words of the merchants seemed unconvincing. He took his sword and cut off his head. The robber laughed when he saw the severed head flying in the air. After the bandit cut off the merchant's head, a whole pool of blood splashed out and stained everything it touched. The robber looked at the headless corpse, smiled, and said that next time he advises him to say it right away. He's already an impatient man, and it's better not to joke with him. He told his bandits that they had already done everything that they had to do. Now they had finished. There was not a single person left alive from those who led this caravan. He ordered to take everything here and get out of here because they need to leave as soon as possible. He doesn't want anyone to find out that this was their doing. One bandit turned to the boss and said that these idiots had a lot of gold and jewelry, and now they won't have to worry about a lack of supplies, and they can relax because these idiots will pay them a well-deserved vacation. One of the robbers pointed his finger at the top of the sandy mountain and told the boss that it looks like they haven't cleared everything here yet and they have another problem. He was surprised that they had guests. He couldn't believe that someone really decided to come so close to them, and perhaps this rat had been watching them all this time. The bandit asked, "Is this guy standing there in the distance really so crazy that he decided to watch us and decided to show himself to them?" Zhang Qian said that it looks like these guys noticed him, and he needed to hide a little better. Now he will probably have another problem on his way. He said that he simply would not pay attention to them. Let them go their own way, and for now he will mind his own business. The robbers began to shout very loudly and celebrate their triumph. After all, they had just robbed an entire caravan, but they were still not given peace of mind by the presence of this guy. They decided that they needed to saddle their horses and go to meet this stranger. They needed to stop him before he told the authorities about what the bandits had done. He thought that they didn't want to let me go just like that. Apparently, he would have to try a little to get these guys to unhook from me. These fools still decided to attack him. This is their choice, and he has no right to object to them. Zhang Qian took his hat with 2 fingers and adjusted it. He pulled his horse by the reins and told it to run forward. They needed to get out of here as quickly as possible. Although this horse was not the most intelligent creature on this planet, at the right moment, she always obeys him. Zhang Qian forced the horse to gallop across these sandy plains. It ran so fast that it seemed to him that only lightning could catch up with them. The bandit shouted that this idiot was running straight at them. Is he really not afraid of them at all? Probably this guy just decided to come to them and die. He understands that he can't cope with them because there are more of them and they are stronger. They ran straight at him with their entire flock, but Zhang Qian was not afraid of them. He was ready to break through their defenses and show them what the real art of battle is. The leader of the pack shouted to the guy that he was an idiot and had gone completely crazy. He said that he would make him beg for his death. He would torture him until the guy admitted his insignificance. I ran to meet them in my hand. I already held the sword and was ready to enter into battle with them. In his past life, he read a lot about various battles and strategies. He read hundreds of stories about how one warrior is able to defeat a whole gang of robbers. This was his chance to prove that all the stories he read were true, and now is the time to find out about it. When he ran up to them as close as possible, he immediately began to swing his sword and chop their heads from their shoulders. He did it very quickly and delicately. They didn't even have time to understand anything. The bandit shouted that this crazy guy just killed Sang Young and Gyo Moon. He mercilessly cut off their heads. He said that he would cut off his head and take revenge on the stranger for the guys he just killed. This robber was very self-confident in his voice. Zhang Qian heard the anger and intent to avenge his brothers, but unfortunately he was too slow. He didn't even have time to defend himself from his sword. Zhang Qian very quickly cut him into 2 halves with a blow. When he ran past this guy, he saw a trail of his blood trailing behind him. With each murder, he became angrier and angrier. He wanted to kill them all, and he could no longer be stopped, because he again felt the taste of blood. Zhang Qian, with precise blows of his sword, cut off the heads of every robber who met him on the way. He tried to cut off the head, or cut the enemy into 2 halves. He wanted to take revenge on them for the merchant they had recently killed. Such vile creatures as these robbers do not deserve the right to life. They consider themselves gods who can decide other people's destinies, and he is the one who can resist such creatures. After him, all that will remain from these robbers are mutilated bodies and a small group of corpses lying with severed limbs. The bandit was very scared because he understood that in front of them was a real martial artist. They didn't understand where this crazy man came from, how he found them, and decided to run away from the battlefield. The boss wanted to spit in the face of his bandits because they are pathetic weaklings who are unable to defeat one guy. The bandit said that the boss himself saw with his own eyes how he fights, and they can't cope with him. This guy is a real sword master, and they won't be able to resist him. They were afraid of him because he single-handedly killed almost the entire gang. The boss approached one of his robbers and pierced him with his sword. He killed him so that this weakling would stop screaming and crying like a girl. The bandit asked what was going on and why did he just kill this guy. He didn't do anything wrong. He was just trying to escape from this crazy warrior. He saw that the boss was coming towards him and began to ask for mercy and did not want to be killed. But the leader of the robbers was already very upset that these two guys ran away from the battlefield and did not fight with the stranger. So he took his machete and threw it right at his head. The big man died immediately after the machete blade pierced his head. His body could not stay on the horse and immediately fell to the ground. The boss looked at the body of the killed robber and walked past him, but in the end he still stepped on his face with his foot and pulled his sword out of his head. Zhang Qian drove closer to this man. It was their leader. It was immediately clear from him that he was a cruel man, but he was not afraid of him. They met his eyes. He looked at the stranger with his eye, and Zhang did not see fear in him. He was not afraid of him at all, even after I cut off the head of all his robbers. This man frightened him and at the same time fascinated him with his composure, because human life meant absolutely nothing to him. He could afford to kill people and then sleep peacefully. Boss asked who this stranger is. He doesn't seem like a member of a fighting alliance, but he fights very efficiently. He said the leader of the robbers and Zhang answered him that he was just a respectable person passing by. The boss said, "Then, you are a respectable person who was just passing by and killed all my professional thugs. Why didn't you go further? Just like that. Why did you decide to get involved in these problems?" Zhang Qian said that he sees that the boss is not very smart because how could he allow himself to just pass by after seeing what they did here? And besides, how could he pass by them when they attacked him? The boss said that this is their job and nothing can be done about it. These are the rules of the game. They attack everyone who they don't like or who they consider suspicious. Zhang Qian said that killing people and robbing them is their job, and as far as he understands, Bass is a professional in this matter. Bass said that there is nothing else to do on the continent since 100 years have passed since its founding, and nothing has changed. The boss was angry with upstarts who dress nicely and profit from poor people. The Fighting Alliance, which received the support of the Empire, of course feel very good here, and he admitted that he even envies them to some extent. The ancient clan of the previous dynasty also feels good on these lands. They quickly mastered it here. Or merchant unions that use and earn money, and many others who constantly receive incredible incomes are engaged in cleaning nonsense. But he was indignant that these creatures lined their pockets by torturing those who tried to settle on this continent for 100 years. They mocked them all this time while they were just trying to survive here. He was just trying to do the same as they did. After all, they themselves call it work. So why don't they call his business work? Because he puts a lot of effort into his work and is trying to be like them. Zhang Qian just listened to him and wanted to understand the motives of this monster. He needed to find out why he was killing innocent people, and it turned out he was just an offended child who was not allowed to work at a normal job. Zhang Qian could no longer stand this stupid chatter, and therefore decided to get off his horse. When he jumped to the ground, he said that he had just heard the stupidest nonsense he had ever heard. Zhang said that in fact, the boss is the simplest crazy killer, obsessed with blood and easy prey, and he can't even imagine how much work these people have to do to have that kind of money. Zhang Qian wiped the blood from his sword so that he would have it clean. He likes it when his sword is stained with dirty blood. He sheathed his sword, raised his head to this bandit, and asked him. When the boss saw him, he asked if he was a member of the Combat Alliance, right? He opened his only eye wide in surprise and looked at the stranger with his stupid expression. Zhang Qian suggested that, therefore, there is a bounty on his head that could be very useful to him. When he heard his words, he turned away and began to laugh. At first, it was a slight, arrogant laugh, but then he began to laugh like a real psychopath. He turned to him, looked straight at him with his only eye, and continued laughing. He couldn't stop at some point. He finally answered that there was a reward for his head. He got into a fighting stance and took out his sword to prepare for battle. He held his sword with both hands. Veins began to appear on his arms. He said that the reward will increase after people find out what he did. The boss said he won't let anyone take this award. He wondered how much this stranger's head would be worth after he killed him. Zhang Qian said that his friends were also as self-confident as he was, and suggested that all thieves have this problem. Zhang Qian said that if the boss is so interested in how much his head is worth, then he will let him check it in battle. He said that he was already angry enough with this thug, and there would be no mercy. The boss was at that moment accumulating red chakra in his hands. They stood opposite each other. Zhang Qian, as always, was in a cold mind and did not give in to emotions, but his opponent was completely different. He poured out all his rage and wanted to destroy him, intimidating him with his strength, but he was not afraid of him. The boss becomes uncontrollable, and this was his weakness. He could not control his aggression. You always need to wait for the right moments to attack, because it is better to deliver one precise blow to defeat than hundreds of blows that will lead to nothing. The crows were already beginning to flock to the corpses that were lying on the ground. They pecked out their livers. Suddenly the crow heard strange sounds. These were the sounds they made while preparing for battle. The bird realized that it was not alone here, and therefore it got scared and flew away. A crow flew over their heads and called the other birds to watch how two people would kill each other. The crows waited until one of us became another corpse. The robber ran straight towards Zhang Qian. He wanted to strike the first blow. The boss was like an indomitable flame that wants to burn everything in its path. But Zhang Qian preferred the wind technique, using a calm, sharp blow 5 seconds. This is the time it takes to kill a person. This is the time that separates him between life and death. A new mark from the blade of the sword appeared on his hat. His hat begins to collect more and more reminders of his opponents. The boss's face was red after he first met Zhang Qian's sword. This is the first time he sees such a face. At these moments, they take their last breath with the hope that they are safe and sound. But the reality is that when they take their first breath, blood begins to flow from their body. He fell to the ground exhausted. I managed to cut him into several pieces during the time he blinked. With his eyes, he didn't even understand what happened to him. Zhang Qian once again wiped the blood from his sword and sheathed it. He killed him so quickly that even he felt embarrassed by it, and he didn't even think that he could be so fast. Probably this guy really made him very angry with his stupidity. He decided to look at it after all, and was wondering what was left after he collided with the sword. His body was cut into several pieces, one leg was cut off, and I cut his arms in half. It was a terrible picture, but this is exactly the death this man deserved. Zhang Qian was about to leave here, but at some point he heard a man's voice. He shouted, "Hey warrior, come here!" The guy turned around to see that it was a voice. Is anyone really still alive here after all this bloodbath? Someone can still talk. It was a merchant in blue clothes, and with a bloody face he was exhausted. His fingers were broken, gathered all his strength to ask for help.